Hello, everyone, and welcome to my presentation on life and culture in Leesburg, Virginia during the Great Depression via an oral history interview with Arthur S. Fry, conducted by Eugene M. Scheel in 1976. Sandwiched between the world wars, many times the impact and scale of the Great Depression goes overlooked. When it is talked about, it is also almost always in the context of large cities or the Great Plains as part of the Dust Bowl. It's very rare that a piece focuses on small towns during this time, even though they were rocked by the Great Depression just like the rest of the country. This lack of historical records is perhaps most apparent in our local histories, with the town of Leesburg in particular having almost no historical records of what life was like at the time. Fortunately, thanks to the efforts of the Thomas Balch Library and renowned local historian Eugene M. Scheel, some first-person accounts of what life was like at the time survived in the form of oral histories. We can now look into one of these interviews and within find a glimpse of what life was like during this pivotal time, seeing how the town of Leesburg and its people endured these challenges and came out stronger on the other side through a touching story of community, hope, and resilience. First, some context. While today we think of Leesburg as a connected part of Northern Virginia, at the time this was very much not the case. Leesburg was a much smaller town, with a population of around 1,700 as opposed to 50,000, and the main industry was focused around the WOD Railroad, which brought in tourists, business, and industrial supplies from Washington, D.C. As a result, Leesburg also acted as a cultural hub for many other smaller towns in the area, such as Purcellville, Luckett's, and Waterford. This was the setting Arthur was born into, and this is the life and times of Arthur S. Fry. For reference, this information was all gathered from the oral history interview conducted by Eugene Scheel on February 8, 1976. Arthur Fry was born just north of Leesburg in the small community of Stumptown in 1887. Growing up, starting at age 12, Arthur worked a variety of jobs, ranging from agricultural work to coffin making, with his work at the Rosemont Farm being particularly of note and being a specifically formative experience for him, as it got him ingrained within local communities and marketplaces. After his experimentation with agricultural work, Arthur transitioned into his career as a post office driver, and he ran a successful career driving mail from Leesburg to Point of Rocks, Maryland, stopping at multiple small towns such as Luckett's and Stumptown along the way. Despite this seemingly successful career, much like for everyone else, challenges came when the Great Depression came. During the Great Depression, Arthur continued his work at the post office, but to less success. As he puts it, quote unquote, I was in debt by spring, but jobs were scarce. Due to this, he had to pick up other odd jobs during this time, just to pay the bills and to help provide for his family, including his wife, Gracie. One such job was building Sears houses, the materials for which were shipped out on the WOD Railroad from Washington, D.C., and working on those, he usually made between $4 and $1.25 a day, depending on the task he was hired to do. For reference, post-inflation, that's approximately between $30 and $100 a day. Another job he had was working at the warehouse for the historic White's Ferry, a ferry which is, while temporarily on leave, still in place today, which transports residents between Leesburg, Virginia, and Poolesville, Maryland. During this time, he was able to able to recount many stories of harsh working conditions and dangerous environments. For instance, he recounts even a story of where a coworker of his died from a equipment failure, but considering, as he said, work was scarce, this was worth the sacrifice. A third and final job of note that Arthur mentions during this time comes from a local businessman who, after leaving Leesburg to make his fortune in Chicago, returned to town and purchased a local plantation. He proceeded to hire a large force of local workers to renovate, restore, and garden the home and the property. This just so happens to be the Selma Plantation, a plantation originally developed by Thomas and Mason, brother of George Mason, and yes, that George Mason. This was essentially pointless public work, but it provided countless jobs for the town and helped many people get through this difficult time. Yet again, as Arthur himself puts it, he gave a lot of people work. You could always get a job there. After his employment at the Selma plantation, Arthur Fry unfortunately fades out of the historical record. His interview with Eugene Shiel cuts off there, and the only other documentation of him is his name on census documents and his gravestone in the Union Cemetery in Leesburg, Virginia, where he lies to this day, next to his beloved wife of 69 years, Gracie. While we unfortunately can't know more about Arthur Fry's experience during the Great Depression, one thing is clear. From the cheerful remarks he left about his neighbors during the time and the fond way in which he praises his community, it's clear that he endured this trying time not alone, but through the support of his community. Perhaps no better example of this community support exists than the opening of the Tally-Ho Theater in 1932. Despite the town of Leesburg being impoverished and records showing that most citizens at the time couldn't afford a ticket, for the opening of the theater, most of the town came out, using it as a chance to dance, revel, and have good fun with their fellow citizens. They used this as a chance to help foster unity and fraternity with each other, as even in the darkest of times, the town came together, united, to find hope in each other and to work to make their lives better.